Assalamu alaikum, shalom alaikum, OCO, and peace be unto you and all. This is Perspectives of Interfaith Television. My name is Zarinah Shakir, and I'm really glad to be back. It's been a while, you may know that, with watching a lot of the reruns, but we're here to do our show, and we like to say this show, Perspectives of Interfaith, is one sentence: to dispel the myths and stereotypes of various faith traditions. Now, sometimes we may just be speaking about a particular religion or spirituality, or we may be focusing on other things within a particular faith tradition. Today, we're actually going to focus on a magazine that has been coming out for a while, and the publisher, he will be able to speak to the length of time that it has been presented. And then we want to get to a particular piece that the magazine, which by the way is called Port of Harlem, we want to speak to two other guests about their involvement with the Gambia. Okay, and I have a question that I'm definitely going to be asking them: why the article, the? Do you know what that's all about? Okay, so let me get started with my first guest, which is Wayne Young.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Great.
So let me just introduce you. I've got to put the glasses on now. So he is the president of the Port of Harlem Gambia Education Partnership. But before we speak even about that partnership, we want to talk about the magazine, Port of Harlem. Wayne received his master's from Roosevelt University in Chicago.
Yeah, downtown Chicago.
Okay, and he's the publisher of Port of Harlem magazine. And what I want to say about Wayne is we met many years ago as a result of the magazine, and we've been able to help each other with some things where the Muslim communities are concerned in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area.
Yes, you've been an extreme help.
Well, really? Okay, that's always good to know.
That could be another show.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. So what I want to ask you is, as I will ask our other guests, and I always like to ask the guests that I have on, when you were younger, you are a young, okay, I know you're going to go there. I know you're going to go there. So when you were younger, what were your goals? What did you actually want to do when you were in elementary or middle school, junior high school, or high school?
I was focused more on wanting to be a business person.
Okay.
Because being born and raised in Gary, I saw what was happening to our city. And at that point, Gary was experiencing white flight. Not only white flight in terms of people, but also in terms of business and economics. Mm-hmm. And at that time, there was a big push to get blacks to understand the need to have entrepreneurs mm-hmm. and to control our own community economically.
Was this pre-Richard Hatcher?
This was with Richard Hatcher.
With Richard Hatcher.
Oh, yes.
Who was, let's say,
the mayor of Gary
the first African-American
mayor of a major American city.
Yes.
And he's still alive. He just celebrated his, I think, his 75th or 80th birthday, or no, the 50th year of his being elected to the city.
Okay. So you grew up in Gary, Indiana.
Exactly.
Which, isn't that the same place as the Jacksons?
Also Denise Williams.
Okay, whoever might remember her, I do remember her, but I don't know
I
about
like her
others.
because she, like myself, still like to participate in things back home. And the Jacksons tend not to.
So when you were, again, growing up in Gary, Indiana, and you wanted to be a business person,
Exactly.
in what area of business?
That was always the big question. I mean, what was my passion? At that point, I was a paper carrier. So I spent a great deal of time with newspapers, being a carrier.
Okay.
But I had no interest in writing. In fact, I hated writing. I hated English.
Oh. So were you speaking another language or something?
I was speaking English, but you know, we had to learn the proper way to speak English and not necessarily traditional black English.
Okay.
And I didn't necessarily like wanting to learn how to speak English correctly or how to read these English books, and I just didn't like English class.
Oh, really?
I really didn't.
And now you have a magazine.
And I've learned so many things about proper grammar, and I'm looking things up constantly about grammar and how to express oneself.
Okay.
And so now it's become a passion that I thought I would never have.
Now that's really interesting. So let's take you from Gary, Indiana to Chicago to Roosevelt University and all of that. What was your major?
Well, it starts off in going to school in Iowa. I was a construction major.
Okay.
Because construction is still a business.
Yes, it is.
And remember, construction is a very vital part of a community and in building the community. So that's what I wanted to do, continue to be a part of building my own community.
Okay.
And that specifically was Gary, but the community at large.
So when you say construction, because that word is
construction.
used, building.
Construction,
okay.
right.
Yes.
So I was a construction engineering major, but I didn't necessarily like engineering so much, so I ended up being a business major. Then I moved out to DC and did some work here, and then moved back to Gary, and Gary's only 30 minutes from Chicago. So I would commute to Chicago to go to school. And Roosevelt, one thing I liked about Roosevelt is that it was a mixed school. Iowa was very white.
Okay.
Gary's very black.
Okay.
And I didn't go to an HBCU. So Roosevelt is somewhat in between, but also the school itself has a history of inclusion. So at that time, I really wasn't into inclusion because the magazine is about inclusion and diversity. And at that point, I wasn't even into that. But I did like the idea that the school was started because blacks and Catholics and I believe Jews and some other people were not welcome at the other Chicago schools after World War II.
Okay.
And the school was built specifically to be inclusive.
Got you. It almost seems like we're going backwards in this country right now around diversity and the word exclusivity, inclusive, and all of that.
Exactly.
Before we get to some of that, what then gave you the impetus to get to doing a magazine, from construction to a person who didn't want to write to now you have a magazine?
You know, you never know what you're going to end up doing and what pieces become part of you that you end up focusing on. In this case, I was selling things at different events, trying to organize and figure out what type of business I actually wanted to participate in with a lot of focus and passion. So at the Black Memorabilia Show, where we sold a lot of Black memorabilia and other things from around the African world. Okay. And again, all these pieces come together in the magazine eventually, but I didn't know that. But at that point, we're selling it at the Black Memorabilia Show, and every year we created or sold a collectible. And a collectible is some item that you buy and you keep for a long time with the hope that it becomes an antique and it becomes of value.
Okay, so let's back up for a moment, though. How did you get into the Black memorabilia and collectibles? Where did that start? I get the Iowa piece, and I get Gary, Indiana, and Chicago, but how did you get into that?
Just a general interest in Black artifacts, and my mother and my grandmother just always had this interest in telling me history stories and you know, having family historical pieces. They were just around. Okay. And this is my father's mother and my mother, of course. And so that still was just there, part of him, without having any glue to it.
I see.
To my other interest. And there was a guy named Steve Lewis. He's passed now, but he would spend a lot of time with people in the community teaching them about Black collectibles and Black memorabilia. And I ended up hearing him at one point And from there, I eventually ended up getting very much involved in the Black Memorabilia Show, which is now up in Gaithersburg. It used to be down in Silver Spring.
Yeah.
So it's still alive. But this one guy, Carl, who had a business on 18th Street, just said, hey, why don't you put all your articles that you've been writing inside one magazine and let that be a collectible? And I thought, hey, I'll just do it just to have a collectible that year. Next thing I know, people were like, oh, this is really cool. I was like, okay. So it ended up being an annual publication, it became biannual, became quarterly, and now we're completely online.
Well, tell us a little more about Port of Harlem and how'd you come up with the name?
Well, it goes back to all these little different pieces that I try to glue together if I can remember all myself. Well, first of all, it's an interest in just being in business. Harlem is the world's most famous Pan-African community.
The one in New York.
The one in New York.
Right.
And so the magazine itself is Pan-African in orientation, meaning that we try to include people from around the African world. So earlier I talked about my interest in African history, Black history, and going to a university that was inclusive and diverse. And the magazine does that too. We purposely do things and write about stories and include people to show the width of people, and not just a very narrow focus of what people are.
So let me just throw something in here. Harlem, that word is a Dutch word, I believe.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what Harlem actually means. I've looked it up, but I forget. Do you know?
I'm not sure what it means, but like you said, it was New York was New Amsterdam at that point.
Right.
And so that's where the word Harlem itself comes from. But we know that Harlem itself became, and even though it's having its gentrification issues.
That was going to be my next piece.
The point is that the word Harlem still brings up the thought of Black people from everywhere in the country or everywhere on the globe coming to one place and building a community. And I always give people the greatest example to me is Abyssinia Baptist Church, which was founded by Blacks from the Deep South and Ethiopians way back when. Way before Ethiopians were even thought about as being people who could possibly be immigrants. They were here already.
Right.
And they formed the church. And even to this day, you go into Harlem and you see people speaking different African languages, from Fula to Hosa, and you see Blacks from the Deep South, and you see Blacks from the Caribbean, and there's an active community of Dominicans.
Okay.
So you get all kinds of Black people still in Harlem.
That was Harlem, and now having been there just for me 3 weeks ago, it was like, whoa, I don't remember all these dogs being here or all of this, the different things that I saw.
You mean dogs on leashes as opposed to dogs just being there.
Yeah, we could talk about that, but we'll
and
leave
dogs
that.
with shoes on.
Right. That's a whole different thing.
Exactly.
Well, just tell us a little more, though, about Port of Harlem magazine. It was hard copy,
right,
and now it's on the internet.
Completely green.
How long has the magazine been up and running?
It's been 22 years since we first started in 1995.
22
For
years.
15 years we've been online.
Okay.
And we've been completely online since 2012.
Gotcha.
And being online, it means you make less money. We tend to make less money because there's less profit in it.
Okay.
But at the same time, we have the potential of getting a larger reach, and it's easier to do because now everything is on my laptop.
Okay.
And I remember the days when I would have to literally go downtown to take some kind of disc, and I don't even know what the type of storage facility it was then, because we've changed so much in X number of years. But now I can do everything on my laptop, and I can go anywhere. I can go anywhere in the world and complete the magazine.
And what kind of articles would people have seen when you first started as opposed to where you are today?
Actually, it's pretty much still the same.
Okay.
I mean, we really work to make sure we have an inclusive magazine. So our largest readership is in Washington, and the second largest readership is in Banjul, the Gambia.
Wow.
And people always ask me, how did that happen?
Well, we're going to get to that, but still, I'm just trying to ask you what kind of articles? What are you, I mean, you have different pieces that you present, but what? It's not, I hate to use Ebony or Essence or one of those magazines. So what does your magazine offer that's different from others?
Well, we're still general interest, so we still cover issues like money and health. The big difference would be is that if we talk about health, we won't talk just about African Americans. We will talk about Africans in other parts of the world and the connection between the two or three. So our way of looking at any issue is much broader.
Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do now is kind of segue to what you are doing in the Gambia, to Banjul and all of that. And just for the purpose of our audience, Banjul is the capital
of the
Gambia, right. I was talking to someone, this is just to digress for a very brief moment, that one of our guests happens to know, and I won't say the name right now, but she's from Zambia.
Exactly.
And I said to her, oh, the Zambia. And then I said, oh, no, I mean Zambia. And I know it's the Gambia. So say to, or let us know, if you know, Wayne, how did they choose it as the Gambia?
It's my understanding that back in the day, when people would send mail, oftentimes mail for Zambia would get to Gambia and back and forth.
Oh.
So to distinguish the two, the became a part of the Gambia.
Really?
And I remember once when I first started getting involved in the Gambia, a friend of mine, that's how I got involved with a guy who was very close. And this girl from, I forget where she was from, maybe Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. She asked him, well, why your country like it's the United States? It's not that big or that important.
Oh my.
I thought that was so interesting that she said that, but it stuck with me because then he explained to me why it's the Gambia.
Well, that's interesting because we don't call it the United States.
Well,
it's just United States,
well, all the time
unless you're working on something.
Yeah, well, sometimes you say the United States.
Right, the
United States of America.
But it doesn't have it in the official title.
I'm not too sure if the Gambia is officially the Gambia either, because lots of times if you look in any kind of any software where you have to pick a country, sometimes it's Gambia, sometimes it's the Gambia.
Got you. So why the Gambia? What was your interest in getting to the Gambia? And I'm getting ready to go on and introduce our next two guests.
Well, simply, shortly, to make it simple, I was working with the Census Bureau, and we're working with international people. Mm-hmm. Again, my interest in internationalism still manifests itself in many ways. And there was a guy, Sorari Jabai, me and him were really tight, as well as his co-Gambians. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I started getting washed into all the information about the Gambia. He'll go back home, the next group will come in, they all look me up, I get to know them. And next thing you know, over 5 years, I knew so many of them. They kept saying, Wayne, you got to come home, you got to come home. And then eventually I went, I think I was 41 there. I went, and I haven't been going like every other year since then. And they just keep me getting involved in one project after another, one project after another. So even now, I don't talk to Jabai as much because he lives in another place and he doesn't like using the computer, but I know his sons.